What if I told you there's a drug that's been around for decades, and it costs about $4 a month, and scientists are now seriously testing it whether it can slow down the aging process itself? Not a supplement, a real FDA-approved drug that hundreds of millions of people already take. I've been on it since 2021, not for diabetes, for longevity. And today we're going to break down exactly what that is, how it works, and what the science actually says, and why the FDA just greenlit the most important anti-aging trial in human history built around this one molecule. Stay with me, this one's worth your time. The drug is called Metformin, and it has one of the most interesting origin stories in all of medicine. It doesn't start in a lab, it starts in a garden. There's a plant called the French lilac, Galega officinalis, that's been used as folk medicine in Europe for centuries. People used it to treat what we now recognize as symptoms of diabetes: excessive thirst, frequent urination, fatigue. Nobody really knew why it worked, they just knew it did. And honestly, that doesn't surprise me. God gives humanity every seed-bearing plant and herb from the very beginning. The framework for botanical medicine is woven into creation itself. God put the answer in a plant centuries before we had science to explain it. That's not a coincidence, that's design. Fast forward to the 1920s. Scientists start isolating compounds from the French lilac and find a class of molecules called biguanides. They start testing them. Some work, some cause serious life-threatening side effects. Those get pulled, but one survives, Metformin. It clears safety trials, gets approved in Europe in the 1950s. The US doesn't adopt it until 1994, which honestly is a whole other conversation about how slow regulatory systems move. By now, it's the most widely prescribed oral diabetes drug on the planet. Billions of prescriptions, decades of safety data, and scientists are starting to notice something strange. Diabetic patients on Metformin are, in some cases, outliving non-diabetic patients who aren't on it. That's when the longevity conversation started getting serious. Alright, let's get into the mechanism. And I'm going to keep this as simple as possible because I want everyone to understand this. Your body is constantly managing energy. Your cells burn fuel, mostly glucose, and they need to know how much fuel is available, how much to store, and how much to burn. That regulation system breaks down in diabetes, but Metformin helps fix it, and it does through three main pathways. Pathway 1, shutting down the liver's sugar factory. Your liver can make glucose on its own. It's called glucogenesis. In diabetics, the liver does this too much, even when blood sugar is already high. Metformin tells the liver to chill out. Less glucose dumped into the blood. Simpler blood sugar control. Pathway 2, hitting the master energy switch. Inside every cell, you have these tiny little power plants called mitochondria. They convert food into energy. Metformin partially blocks a component of the mitochondria called complex 1. Now that sounds bad, but here's the interesting part. When that happens, the cell senses an energy shortage and activates a molecule called AMPK. Think of AMPK like a survival mode switch. When it flips on, the cell starts doing things that are really good for long-term health. Burning fat, cleaning up waste, repairing DNA, reducing inflammation. All stuff that keeps cells young and functional. Pathway 3, the gut-brain connection. This one's newer and still being studied, but Metformin also affects how the gut communicates with the brain, specifically around hormones like GLP-1 that regulate appetite and insulin sensitivity. This is part of why it can help with weight management even beyond the glucose effects. Now here's a 2025 update that honestly surprised me when I found it. Researchers at Kobe University just published the first clinical evidence that Metformin actually shifts the levels of metals in your blood. Specifically, it lowers copper and iron and raises zinc. Why does that matter? Because excess copper and iron are linked to oxidative stress, basically cellular rust, and zinc is critical for immune function, DNA repair, and hormonal health. This metal shifting effect might explain a whole category of Metformin's protective benefits that scientists couldn't account for before. Nobody fully understood why it seemed to protect against so many different diseases simultaneously. This might be part of the answer. And here's where it gets really interesting, and where I want to spend some time because this is the reason I personally got on it. Aging isn't just getting old. At the cellular level, aging is a collection of specific biological processes. Inflammation building up over time, cells accumulating damage and not cleaning it up. up, DNA repair slowing down, mitochondria becoming less efficient. These processes are what lead to heart disease, cancer, dementia, and most of the other conditions that cut life short. What if you could slow these processes down? That's the theory behind using metformin for longevity. And here's the evidence that started building the case. Epigenetic clocks. Your DNA has markers on it, like timestamps, that reflect your biological age, not just your calendar age. Scientists use these to measure how fast someone's actually aging at the cellular level. Studies using two well-validated models, the Horvath clock and the Hannum clock, found that people taking metformin showed slower epigenetic age acceleration, meaning their biological age was ticking slower than their actual age. That's not a small thing. That's one of the most direct measures we have of the aging process. Cancer reduction. Multiple large-scale observational studies found that metformin users had lower rates of several cancers: colon, breast, prostate, and lung. The AMPK activation and autophagy effects are likely part of this. Now, autophagy. Let me define that because it's one of those words that sound complicated, but it's actually a beautiful concept. Autophagy literally means self-eating in Greek. But don't let that throw you off. What it actually means is your cells have a built-in recycling system. It also happens when you fast, for example. When a cell accumulates damaged parts, broken proteins, dysfunctional organelles, cellular junk, autophagy is the process that packages up that junk, breaks it down for reuse, or removes it entirely. Think of it like your body's internal cleaning crew. When autophagy is working properly, cells stay cleaner, healthier, and more functional. When it slows down, which happens naturally as we age, junk builds up, and that's when things start going wrong. Metformin keeps the cleaning crew active, and when cells are managing their waste properly and repairing DNA more efficiently, abnormal mutations are caught and cleared before they become a bigger problem. Cardiovascular protection. Metformin reduces oxidative stress in the heart. It lowers the heart's workload and oxygen demand. Long-term studies show that these cardioprotective effects persist even when other metabolic markers are controlled for. Meaning it's not just indirectly helping because it lowers blood sugar, there's something else going on. And neuroprotection. Early studies suggest that metformin may lower the risk of neurodegenerative diseases, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's. The exact mechanism isn't fully nailed down yet, but AMPK activation and reduced neuroinflammation are the leading theories. Now let's talk about the biggest deal in this whole conversation, the TAME trial. TAME starts for targeting aging with metformin, and it is genuinely one of the most significant medical studies in recent history. Not because of what it's testing, but because of what it's trying to prove to the FDA. Here's the context. Right now, aging is not a medical condition. The FDA doesn't recognize it as a treatable disease. So pharmaceuticals can't go to the FDA and say, we want approval for a drug that slows aging, because aging isn't officially something that can be treated. Every drug that exists treats specific diseases: heart disease, cancers, Alzheimer's. But what if you could slow down the underlying process that causes all of them? Instead of playing whack-a-mole with individual diseases, you target the root. That's what TAME is designed to prove is possible. The trial FDA authorized in 2015 is enrolling adults between ages 65 and 79 with no history of diabetes. They're taking standardized doses of metformin for 6 years. The researchers are tracking whether metformin can delay the onset of age-related diseases as a cluster, meaning heart disease, cancer, and dementia together, rather than just one of them. If TAME succeeds, it sets a precedent. The FDA would have to acknowledge aging as a treatable condition, and that opens a door to a completely different era of medicine, one focused on lifespan and health span, not just individual diseases. That is a paradigm shift, and metformin is a molecule that's being used to kick that door open. All right, I'm not here to sell you anything, I'm just here to give you the full picture. So let's talk about the downsides and the ongoing debates. B12 depletion. This is the most well-documented side effect of long-term metformin use. Metformin interferes with how your gut absorbs B12. B12 is critical. It supports nerve function, red blood cell production, and DNA synthesis. If you're on metformin long-term and you're not supplementing B12, you can develop a deficiency without even knowing it. I supplement B12. That's non-negotiable if you're taking this drug. Get your B12 levels checked if you're on metformin. It's a simple blood test, and use methylcobalamin, the active form, not the cheaper cyanocobalamin version. It absorbs better. The exercise controversy. This one was controversial when the study came out and is still being debated. A Rutgers-led research team found that metformin may blunt the fitness benefits of exercise, specifically the improvements in blood vessel function, cardiovascular fitness, and insulin sensitivity that normally come from training were reduced in metformin users. The reason goes back to that mitochondrial complex 1 inhibition we talked about. Exercise works partly by stressing the mitochondria in a controlled way, and that stress triggers adaptations that make you fitter over time. Metformin's interference with that pathway may dampen those adaptations. The debate is whether this is significant in real-world practice, especially at lower longevity doses versus higher therapeutic doses. Some researchers say the effect is meaningful, others say it's overstated. I train, I haven't stopped, but I think it's worth noting. It's not for everyone. Metformin is contraindicated in people with kidney disease, liver disease, and certain heart conditions. If you're thinking about it for longevity purposes as non-diabetic, you need to have that conversation with a doctor who actually understands the longevity angle, not one who's just going to tell you, you don't need it, you don't have diabetes. I've been on metformin since 2021. I'm not diabetic, my fasting glucose was fine, but I've been reading the TAME research, watching what was coming out of the longevity space. I decided the risk-benefit made sense for me. I use a CGM, a continuous glucose monitor, so I can actually see in real time what my blood sugar is doing. Metformin is one piece of a larger protocol. It's not a magic pill, it's a tool. And that's really the mindset I want to leave you with. This isn't about popping a cheap drug and thinking you've hacked aging. It's about understanding the biology, making informed decisions, stacking smart habits, sleep, training, diet, stress management, and using tools like this where the evidence supports it. The TAME trial is the most important signal right now. When that data fully matures, it's going to either validate or challenge a lot of what the longevity community has been saying for years. I'll be watching it closely, and I'll bring the updates here when they come. And that's Metformin, French lilac to FDA longevity trial, $4 a month. If this hits different, drop it in the comments. I want to know if you're already on it, if you're considering it, or if you have questions. Let's talk about it. As always, do your own research, talk to your doctor, and make informed decisions. Stay grounded, and God bless.